Nepal and all that stuff. Anyway, she's coming here to Oregon for 3 or 4 days tomorrow.
Great.
Hello. Welcome to the session on Findhorn, Past, Present, and Future. My name is Daniel Greenberg, and I have the pleasure to have 3 old friends with me, Roger Doudna, Michael Shaw, and Graham Meltzer. And we will each speak about 10, 11 minutes. We'll introduce ourselves before we speak. Roger will talk about the broader history of Findhorn. Graham will talk about some of the cultural shifts from sort of a coherent to more diverse culture there. I'll talk a little bit about the Findhorn Foundation, and Michael will talk about what's happening now and the future, especially in the community. But before we get started, let's do a traditional Findhorn practice, and I'll lead a quick attunement. And this is just something that is very common at Findhorn. It's just taking a moment to settle in and kind of welcome the present state of all of us, and also the task ahead of us. So I invite us all to either close our eyes or look at the people on the screen, take a breath, and allow however you're feeling just to be present and to feel our connection, both through the technology of Zoom, but also let's feel connected through our passions for community and cooperation and a better future. And may this session be enlightening and fun. May it lead to compassion and curiosity. Blessings all around. Thank you. And with that, I will hand it over to Roger, and I will give you a 3-minute and a 1-minute warning. And
Right. Well,
whenever you're
I'm meant to be doing a 1-minute introduction first.
Yeah, do a quick yeah, I'm giving you 11 minutes. Go for it.
Okay, so my 1-minute introduction is that I have a PhD in philosophy, which and I've also have a background in documentary filmmaking. And I came here from California 50 years ago, nearly 50 years ago. And I'll try to give you an overview of my time and my sense of whatever contribution I've been able to make to the community since that time. Thanks. I also note that all the other presenters are also doctorates, have their own doctorates in various fields, and have also made their distinctive contributions. Over to you.
No, it's still you, Roger. Keep going. We're going to each introduce ourselves just before we start.
You want me to actually spiel now?
Yeah, yep. Give your spiel.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I arrived at Findhorn in November of 1974 for a program, as did Michael Shaw, incidentally, for a program that was meant to be the launch of a Western Mystery School curriculum at Findhorn. At that point in time, Paul Hawken had written his first piece on Findhorn that I believe appeared in the East-West Journal or New Age Journal. It generated a lot of attention, particularly around the Findhorn Gardens, which brought a wonderful mix of Americans, South Africans, Australians, wonderful young people from all over the world. And the course primarily consisted of a refresher in theosophy. Theosophy was the lingua franca of the time. It's what part of what attracted me, because I was also involved with something called the Arcane School when I was doing my doctoral work. And when I arrived here, I just discovered this place that was just full of energy. Just blew me away, blew all of us away. We had an extraordinary sense of connections between us, extraordinary experiences. In my own case, It was my first real leap of faith. Matter of fact, I was high for the first 6 months I arrived. And many people tried to bring me down to size, shall we say, but failed to do so. Out of that initial program, I was asked to vocalize a group called Outbreath, which was a newly created group that basically had to do with Findhorn's relationship with the larger world. I believe Michael also joined me in that enterprise. That in turn led to a series of college classes. We basically invite people to get together and just talk about whatever they wanted to explore together or share their experiences. That in turn led to a series of about, well, over a period of years, to about maybe 50 of these college classes, which really sort of provided opportunities for our myriad cultural backgrounds to meet and connect and to fuse into what was an extraordinarily dynamic exercise in what David Spangler called planetary culture. I was also asked to put together the first series of workshops. I don't remember all of it. There were 4, I remember. One was called Creating a New Age Community. One was called Cooperation with Nature around the gardens. One was called Revelation, Birth of a New Age, which actually Michael ran for a number of years. All of these were really just opportunities for people to come, have ways of gateways into the community, to just to experience the place. My core conviction was that the Findhorn had a real gift to give the world, and my job was basically just to create ways to enhance that gift and make it available to the more broader public. Over a period of years, I got involved with conferences as well. I think I created the first international conference together with a guy named Tom Welsh, who was a retired tank commander. And the first military man I ever met that I really loved, I must say. He was a caravan mate for a number of years. And yeah, that first conference included what was called the World Crisis and the Wholeness of Life. And the whole point of the exercise was to somehow or other contrast what was going on in the world, which seemed chaotic and crazy, with the kind of new life and energy which was available and tangible at Findhorn. That led to a series of conferences over years. In fact, I think I personally was involved in the organization and presentation of 10 of them. One of them was, the first one was really quite significant. It included E.F. Schumacher, William Irwin Thompson, David Spangler, and Lady Eve Balfour, the then president of the Soil Association, the Organic Soil Association in Britain. And it was there, I think, that we got the first intimations of planetary culture, largely because William Irwin Thompson had written a book called Darkness and Scattered Light, which was basically his sense of how bleak the overall picture looked, but that there were these pockets of new life emerging in various places around the world. He spoke of Oroville, he spoke of Findhorn, Arcosanti, Esalen. And we worked with that concept over a period of years, actually it developing into a whole raft of conferences. We were doing 2 and sometimes 3 conferences a year as being our way of opening up to the larger world and inviting people in who were sympathetically and minded and supportive. Out of that eventually came the Findhorn Fellowship, actually, which I asked to create in 1984. I just come back from working for a year in California for Barbara Marx Hubbard, who was then running for vice president of the United States. A quixotic campaign, but a campaign for a positive future and a way to seed the whole idea of a more positive future, which went essentially for naught when Ronald Reagan was reelected with a landslide, actually. I returned to Findhorn in October of '84, I think it was, in time to hear Jonathan Port for the first time. And Jonathan Port had just written a book called Seeing Green, which was about essentially the whole reworking of the British economy, which he could see was possible, but what he reckoned he would never see in his lifetime. And what's fascinating to me about that is that a lot of that vision, of course, is now much more visible, much more tangible, and actually beginning to happen. At least if the Labour wins the next election, we will see about that. Well, I'm going to say anything more. Well, I could say that, yes, that in a way that the planetary culture was something that we were working with at Findhorn, but we were also working with another idea called planetary village. And that was another one of the major events that I was happily involved with. I was asked to do a conference in 1982 called Building a Planetary Village. What's a planetary village? Well, it's essentially what we eventually came to call eco-village, but it's a place that lives its own life as if the planet was the ultimate address, and responding to not just our own needs, but to our sense of what the planet was asking of us. In fact, I built my own house. Was I think the first permanent house on the park. I began that exercise in 1986, completed it in April of Easter time '87, and that sort of launched a whole decade really of redeveloping the caravan park into what we promised would become an ecological village. And that has been the name of the game for the last, well, 20 years, really. That began in the '80s. It certainly carried on for a decade, and then it's been going on ever since, really. We now have built more than 100 ecological dwellings in various sizes, shapes. And we are trying now. We just got grant support to build a new sanctuary, which was unfortunately destroyed recently by fire, by arson by one of our own people, together with our community center. So we just got money for the new sanctuary, and we're now turning our attention to a new community center as well.
Roger.
And that's the name of the game. That's my contribution.
Roger, thank you, Roger. I'm going to give you like 2 or 3 more minutes. And what I would like to ask you to do is imagine we're on a long elevator ride, and I know nothing about Findhorn. Give me the basics, the founding, the founders, the 3 principles. Just lay out the basics for us.
Okay. The Findhorn was founded by essentially 3 people: Peter and Eileen Caddy, and Dorothy McLean, all of whom were resident at the time. They were subsequently supplemented by a guy called Rock, R. Ogilvy Crombie, who lived in Edinburgh, and then they were also joined by a young American called David Spengler. The 3 founders, the 3 resident founders, Peter, Eileen, and Dorothy, were thought to represent esoterically will, love, and light. And more specifically, they had also were incarnated 3 founding principles: work is love and action, that was Peter's; cooperation with nature, that was Dorothy's; and Eileen was basically turning within and getting your own guidance and so forth, spiritual direction. Those 3 principles remain our founding and abiding principles, at least for the Findhorn Foundation. And I think they're still providing the basic framework for, well, as we find our way into the future.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. When we're trying to keep this short so that we can have ample time for discussion and questions. So I will pass it on to Graham, and if you could introduce yourself quickly and then share what you'd like.
Thank you, Daniel. Nice to be with you all. Nice to be with 3 people who are all close friends, and 2 of which are close neighbors. I've been a Findhorn resident for just 20 years, as opposed to Michael and Roger, who have been there much longer, 40 or 50 years. And so I don't feel as qualified to speak about the early history as they certainly are. But I'm happy to talk about recent history, and I'd like to focus mostly on the movement away from a very cohesive beginning, which I believe we had, to a more diverse, fragmented one, in my opinion, and what's the implication of all of that. I've lived in a lot of other intentional communities and researched many as well, having done a PhD on co-housing in the 90s. So I'm an advocate and a passionate one at that for all forms of communal living, but from a personal perspective, I'm particularly passionate about egalitarian forms of communal living. I guess as best exemplified by those that are members of the Fellowship of Egalitarian Communities, a couple of which I'll mention. But to cut a long story short, in 2005, having done my research, been an academic for several years, being burned out at that, taking an early retirement, I decided I needed to get back into community for my own personal well-being. So I looked around the world and at the same time I wanted to get out of Australia, to be honest. I looked around the world for egalitarian communities to join. And I shortlisted 5 and traveled to visit each of them and to do their kind of introductory program, their equivalent of Experience Week. We call it in Findhorn. The others being Twin Oaks in America, Gannis in New York City, Seg in Germany, Tamera in Portugal, and then finally Findhorn. And I visited them in that chronological order. And I arrived in Findhorn in 2005 for the Gen Plus 10 conference. That was my introduction. I met and befriended the wonderful Eris Coons at that time, which I remember well, and was so inspired by that conference and by the people I'd met during it of the Findhorn community that I decided to stay on there, do Experience Week, and make Findhorn my home. Not so much because it was an egalitarian community, because it wasn't, but it had an egalitarian component, which at the time was the Findhorn Foundation, which you could say was egalitarian in the sense that all 120 odd of its members received more or less the same benefits, remuneration, housing, accommodation, and so on, irrespective of whatever job they did. So it was a case of from each according to their ability and to each according to their needs, basic Marxian principle to which I've always strongly held. So I stayed on in Findhorn, did Experience Week, and then had to come back to Australia, but returned to Findhorn with a resident permit, and did what was then called the Foundation Program, which was a 3-month-long, much deeper, immersive introduction to the culture of the place. And following that was kind of drafted into the Findhorn Foundation probably sooner than most, but there was a bit of a crisis going on where they needed some technical advice. I had an architectural background and I could provide that. And so I became a member of the Findhorn Foundation, a co-worker immediately, and worked from then on in the asset development department. We called ourselves Asset Development Group, which was responsible for design, construction of buildings and infrastructure. Did that for several years, 7 or 8 years, and then discovered ICSA, and did that through attending a conference. My first ICSA conference was 2008 in Amsterdam, where I met Bill Metcalf, and was drafted by Bill into a kind of a team to help organize the 2001 ICSA conference in Seg, which we did. And then followed that up with a couple more ICSA conferences, and including the one in Israel in 2013. And it was at that conference that I pitched to bring the ICSA conference, the next ICSA conference, to Findhorn in the Israel one was 2010. Pitched to bring ICSA to Findhorn in 2013, which I did, working with actually Jan Bang on that one. And again, very successful conference. And so following that, I was drafted into the conference team that Roger mentioned earlier, was where he contributed for many years, and worked with a team of dedicated people on several conferences following that for the rest of my time as a co-worker in the foundation. I can remember working on Gen Plus 20 in 2015 and Climate Change and Consciousness in 2019, which many of the people watching will have been at, I'm sure. At that point, COVID arrived on the scene. I took a second retirement, and we all went into lockdown, which changed the perspective for many of us, I'm sure, including many of the aspects of Findhorn's culture, including, I'd say, the viability of the Findhorn Foundation, because the foundation was reliant. The foundation's main purpose was to provide education and to provide it on site, to provide it for people who were seeking answers to means of living communally, spiritually, ecologically. And so when we had the lockdown and could no longer run conferences, the foundation kind of ground to a halt in many ways. And I think that was the beginning of its demise in a kind of economic, financial sense anyway. And as many of you will know, and I hope others will talk about in more detail, the foundation's struggled to remain viable ever since. Recently reducing in size down from 50 people to about a dozen, and cancelled all programs. So currently the foundation is not providing programs as we know it, as we knew it. So the community is in a kind of an interesting space at the moment, where a lot of people have a lot of concern about the future direction of the foundation and community, now that we seem to have lost our essential raison d'etre in educational programs. But actually, I personally am quite encouraged and think that this could be the beginning of a whole exciting new chapter for the community. And in a sense, I'd say that's likely to come about as much because with the foundation shrinking to a dozen or so people, meaning that they now comprise just 2% of the resident population, as opposed to once upon a time being preeminently responsible for most of the educational offerings of the community. Now, in a sense, they're much less relevant. And I think it's an opportunity for the community as a whole to kind of metaphorically step out from under the skirts of the mother and develop its own direction and its own independence. And that's an exciting thing. One of the possibilities being that the community as a whole can possibly purchase a lot of the buildings, the infrastructure, and the land that the foundation historically has owned from the foundation, and thereby take control of its development direction and be more responsible for its future direction. So a lot of us are excited about that. Sorry, I'm getting very dry. So what's the time situation then?
Well, 1 minute, if you hold up.
So just to finish, perhaps, So an example of, for example, a recent example that's just come up. A new program being offered by a couple of our resident members who are not necessarily connected with the foundation, Del Haller and Anna Morjan. They're offering what they're calling community orientation days, which are in a sense a replacement for Experience Week. And I saw in their blurb about this program, they write, right now as balances shift and we start a new chapter in our history, we believe it's important to confirm that we hold in common what we hold in common so that we can step into our strength as a community to reaffirm and share our essence together so that each of us can hold the light as one. So the emphasis there being community cohesion. And at the end of the day, I think it is community cohesion that will make or break our community and most communities. It is the essence of community after all. And so whilst I'm also in favor, of course, of, in some ways, of greater diversity in the sense that it enables individuals to express themselves in whatever way they see fit. I also believe that sometimes they can be at the cost of community cohesion, and that at the end of the day, for intentional communities, it's the cohesion that really counts in terms of their effectiveness. So I'm hoping, having seen the community move from almost complete cohesion in the 70s, and I say that because I recently watched a couple of documentaries from the 70s, which really struck me in terms of the sense of cohesion, sense of purpose, shared purpose that the people who were there had at the time. Roger kind of touched on that just now. And I can probably organize to post the links to those two documentaries in the chat. We've moved from that being almost totally cohesive to being almost totally diverse in a way which has benefits, but for the most part, I think can be detrimental to our sense of community and our effectiveness as a well-recognized community. So I'm hoping that the pendulum will swing back the other way, and I think purchasing the land from the foundation is certainly one way that we can do that. How's that for timing?
Good. Excellent. Thank you, Graham. I'll go next. My name is Daniel Greenberg, and I first want to say that I arrived in Oroville yesterday. Haven't slept in 2 days, so if I fall over, you'll just carry on. My quick history, I first lived at Findhorn in 92, 93. I was completing my doctorate in child development, school psychology, working with kids there. In the middle of that year, a friend brought over some college students. It was one of the first young person program at Findhorn. People were freaked out thinking they were going to mess up the place, which they did. But it also was really inspiring for people, and it was inspiring for me. I remember waking up with goosebumps thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to work with these emerging adults because I just saw them kind of wake up to the experience of being in this incredible community. And I had that same experience when I traveled around to communities across North America the year prior. So I came back to the US after that, and after a few years was able to set up a nonprofit called Living Roots, and it partnered with the University of Massachusetts, and we ran study abroad programs in eco-villages. So we did a semester program in Oroville, where we are now, at Findhorn, Senegal, Mexico, Peru, all over. It was wonderful work. Maybe 1,500 students went through those programs. I left Living Roots in 2012, and it sadly ceased functioning a couple years later in 2014. I went on to start another organization more about climate change. I was also one of the co-founders of Gaia Education, served as president of the Global Eco-Village Network from, I think it was 2015 to 2019. And then I was living in Oroville in around 2019 and 2020, went back to North America for COVID, back to Oroville, and then was offered a position I couldn't refuse, which was the director of education at the Findhorn Foundation, sort of what I thought was a dream job. I went back to Findhorn, I think it was September of 22. And then I left that position about 9-10 months later, and before the foundation ceased functioning, which I'll get to in a second. and then came back to the US, and I currently am co-directing the Foundation for Intentional Community. And I've been in a couple of sessions where people call it Federation and the Fellowship and stuff. So I mean, it's a confusing name, but it's the Foundation for Intentional Community, IC.org. And yeah, so that's that. And I also want to just give a quick, just basic background that, so a lot of people are confused because they hear that the Findhorn is closed. What does that mean? Findhorn as a community started in November 62. So it's about 61 plus years old. And then over the years, more and more people are attracted to this crazy place in northern Scotland that was, people were talking to plants and growing 40-pound cabbages and what's going on here. And after a number of years, people were like, well, what do we do with all these people showing up? And so Roger would know the details, but they decided to set up a program to kind of introduce them, orient them to the community. That evolved into something called Experience Week. And that became sort of the bread and butter for the community that then started the foundation, the charity, 10 years after its founding. So the Findhorn Foundation started in 1972. And it's just a little over, it was a little over 50 years old. Yeah, so again, and when I was living at Findhorn, and then I was inspired to start Living Roots in 99, and then a couple years after that, the Findhorn College started, and that also went on until just recently. And for most of that time, or at least while Living Roots was running, those semester programs were the bread and butter of the college. They also had some programs of English in community, which were pretty cool. Yeah, but the college also ceased functioning a couple years ago as well. And so when I arrived in September of 22, there was still a fairly complex ecosystem of programs at Findhorn. In addition to the Experience Week, which ran pretty much weekly, there was something called the Game of Transformation, which started at Findhorn years ago, uses the angel cards. It's kind of a guided Ouija board tarot reading. It's a way of, it's a wonderful process for introspection that's done in groups. There was a facilitator training of that. There were retreats run on 2 islands off the west coast of Scotland. Iona, there was a retreat house called Trebon that the foundation still owns, and Araid, which is a wonderful island that's stewarded by members of the foundation. And that's also, there's retreats, which I believe they're still continuing. There was something called FIX, which is the Findhorn International Center for Sustainability, which was started a few years ago and was more focused toward business. And they would run programs on things like ethical business practices. They had a Findhorn International Forum on Sustainability, Pivot to Policy, Art of Facilitation. Those are quite successful programs. There was something called the Findhorn Bay Care Farm, which worked with adults with learning disabilities, autism, Asperger's, and brought them into Findhorn, usually worked on one of the farms or one of the gardens. That was a wonderful program. There was a festival of sacred dance that happened every year, attracted many people. There were solstice events, lots of workshops on permaculture, eco-theater, plant music, just about everything you can imagine. So, and there were realities. Okay, so when I arrived, Findhorn was already in deep crisis. And so there was a bunch of things that contributed to this. One was, well, Brexit, which really made it much more difficult for people to travel to Scotland and to participate in the programs, teach and volunteer there. That was a challenge. And that actually got implemented in the middle of COVID, which of course was a huge crisis because I think almost, well, 80% of the community's income was through its place-based programs, and they just came to a halt, right? I mean, everything stopped in COVID. So basically the income of the foundation just came to a grinding halt. And they didn't have any online programs at that time. Also around that time, and I think COVID exacerbated it, or increased that. I shouldn't say exacerbated, because it's actually a good thing that there was more carbon awareness and people were less likely to travel, doing more things at home. And so Findhorn did pretty quickly try to pivot into the online world, and started doing online programs like Creating Findhorn Where You Are, sort of trying to lead people through the journey of Findhorn, but online. There was an Angel of the Month. And also there was rising cost of living, particularly if anyone's in the UK. I mean, this is globally, but especially around energy costs were getting really high. So it was harder to just have the finances work. And then because the income just shut down, there were redundancies, or a lot of people were let go. And it could have been done better. There's lots of, I wasn't there during that time, but it was felt by a lot of people that it was done a little bit harshly. I mean, a lot of people lived their lives at Findhorn. And so this was family. They invested so much into it. And so suddenly to be told that, well, we no longer require your services was a big shock to lots of people. And then, as Roger mentioned, one of those ex-employees who was a bit mentally unstable committed arson and burned down both the community center and the sanctuary. And these were core buildings in the park. And that was traumatic on many, many levels. And it also made it very difficult to run programs because there was no kitchen, there was no dining room, and the sanctuary was, of course, a really key part of the community. And so when I arrived, the systems were kind of broken. Early on, again, back in the early 90s, but even before then, people would arrive at Findhorn, they do an experience week, they'd love it, they would continue on with maybe a community living or living in community guest program, LCG, maybe a foundation program, they would do some leadership training, they would come on staff, and over time, they would rise into a leadership position in some domain at Findhorn, which was great in the sense that everyone who was in a leadership position there lived and breathed Findhorn. I mean, they really embodied the culture of Findhorn. And so with all the redundancies, that kind of was gone. And also because that seemingly, the perception was, well, that didn't work. And so the trustees made a big decision to say, well, let's actually hire new people who have background in their positions. So I was one of those people. I was unique in the sense that I had a 30-year history with Findhorn, but I was sitting in leadership meetings and looking around, and I'm like, wow, most of these people had never even heard of Findhorn before they saw the job advert. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm the institutional memory here? This isn't right. And so it was very, very challenging trying to embody the essence of Findhorn at that time. I arrived thinking, okay, things are broken. Where's the magic of Findhorn? For me, the magic of Findhorn was always the immersion in the community. That was what inspired me, what I had seen inspire our students and so many people that have come to Findhorn. And so I'm like, okay, let's re-engage with the community. I was looking at immersion programs, trying to get the college going, maybe trying to re-engage networks. But it pretty quickly became clear that wasn't where it was going and what was actually needed. And we hired a new CEO, Terry Gilby, who's still there, wonderful guy. And he was the CEO of Esalen. And there was also a marketer, Kirsten, who was the marketer for Kripalu. Kripalu, Esalen, wonderful places, both workshop centers. And so that was sort of the mindset of a lot of the leadership at that time. And I felt a little bit on the outside saying, wait a minute, how do we engage more with the community? We'll never know whether if we kind of went back in time and said, let's actually take the time to see how to re-engage with the community. I'm not sure. I think it was probably the best thing at that time to really focus on just the workshops. And so what happened is, when it looked like the finances just weren't improving, we did a number of things. We ceased functioning of the programs or all but necessary things in the park. If you're not familiar, Findhorn has sort of two main areas. There's the park, which is a beautiful area, which Michael will show a picture of in just a minute. And then there's Clooney Hill, which is a hotel. And so let's focus the workshops in the hotel. And we also looked at trying to expand the programming from 5 to 7 days. We were looking at weekend programs. We were trying to expand our online offerings, looking at home groups, helping people have that experience. Online. Oh, there's an echo. English and community courses. Yeah, so, oh wait. So there was a lot of things that we were trying to do at that time. I was also looking at how do we bring Findhorn abroad? How do we do experience weeks elsewhere? And I was also looking at how to bring people from Findhorn and do a Findhorn-like program here in Oroville. But none of that really happened because the finances just kept going down. And then in July of last year, it was announced that the foundation would close, and it closed officially in September. And so now the foundation is in a transition period, and it's meant to really be developing an operating model that delivers the core principles of Findhorn. It's envisioned as a 32-week process in 5 phases. And so the first one was last October, where they formed a team. And as Graham said, I think it's about 10 and a half full-time equivalent people. And then in November, they were looking at who their audience was, a lot of stakeholder interviews. And then they're just sort of in the end of the process of thinking about the why of Findhorn, more interviews. And then the next couple months, we'll be looking at the what, really trying to create an operational model. And then from April through May, they're going to get into the how, and really looking at governance, management, physical assets, education programs, organizational systems and structures, all of that. And I don't actually even know where that stands, but I think that's the process that they're in. And the intention is to have a new model for how the foundation can go forward in June in 24. So, yeah, Graham was sort of mentioning this too, that the image that I have for it, the metaphor, is that the foundation was kind of like the pioneer species. It was sort of, and it became this dominant canopy over the foundation, and it was sort of covering everything. And then there was this big lightning strike, and the tree fell, right? And so there's no more foundation. But in its place, there's this big area which is now getting sunlight. And so I think there's a lot of succession species. There's a lot of initiatives now that are feeling like, oh, maybe it's our time now. And I actually am also optimistic. I think there's the angel of Findhorn, I feel is alive and well. And I think it's fascinating, and I'm very, very curious to see how it will emerge in the coming months and years. But I trust that Findhorn is as needed, if not more needed now in this crazy time in humanity. So I don't think the foundation will be gone too long. In what form it comes back remains to be seen. That is me, and I will now pass the ball to Michael.
That's great. Readjust this. Okay, so I'm Michael Shaw, joined in 1974, just a few days ahead of Roger Dean. He'll argue that he arrived before me, but he didn't. Anyway, my doctorate is in engineering. It's honorary from Heriot-Watt University, so I see the world a little bit through the non-dual aspects of Vedanta, which is of course alive and well here in Oroville, as well as engineering. So let's have the first slide.
Okay.
The first slide is actually a slide of the park, which is the center of the community. Is that visible?
Yep. You all seen that?
Yep, I can see that. So this is pretty well, all the residential community as it is at present. You can see, actually in my screen it's green, but it should be blue, which is the sea, where it's a peninsula, and the Findhorn Peninsula includes this eco-village. About 300 people living there, and some of the houses go right back to the 60s, and others were built last week. Interestingly enough, most of the land you're seeing in this particular photograph is privately owned. The foundation own a little bit in the middle. They own a large chunk of about 8 to 10 acres on the west, which is on the left-hand side of this photograph. And then they own land in the middle of that forest you can see on the top right of the photograph. But people own their own houses. They own the land the house is on. The recent development was developed by a Findhorn company called Doudna, and there's east winds, west winds, and north winds, which again are brand new houses, lots of solar, lots of heat pumps, 60, 70 heat pumps, lots of solar PVs. It really is the eco-village part of the Findhorn eco-village in many ways. Next slide. So as I think both Graham and and Roger were saying, the community is actually in good health. It is running well. It is finding its feet without the foundation, and it is a multiplicity of organizations. So I'll start with a simple chart and then move to a more complex one. There are these 7 different sort of spheres of the community's life. Financial services and land acquisition is the top left one there. Financial services is a benefit society called Ecopia. And Ecopia have done lots of funding and investments in the community, including the shop, the wind farm, affordable housing, and that type of thing. And there, if you need to get a project off the ground, one of the first people you talk to is the financial services Ecopia. Land acquisition similarly is a community benefit society, was formed in the last year and is specifically set up to buy land for the foundation. That is its fundamental purpose. Of course, it could do other things as a benefit society. And the benefit society is owned, or is run, is governed by its members. And because of the way it is set up, it has access to something called the Scottish Land Fund, which is the Scottish government's program for allowing communities in particular areas, mainly in the Highlands, which is rather underpopulated, to buy the estates on which they live, particularly if there's an absentee landlord. Well, at present, we have a classic absentee landlord, which is the Findhorn Foundation, not doing anything with the land they still own. And so we're well on the way to making an application for maybe 2 or 3 bits of land, and we can possibly get funded by up to £1 million on each piece of land. So it's a substantial opportunity, and is the main opportunity from a sort of a financial fiscal point of view that the foundation has at this point. On the next slide is called New Build and Construction. That is really 2 organizations, one called the Park Eco-Village Trust, which was largely started by Roger Doudna, we saw at the beginning, and they do a lot in affordable housing with finance coming from Ecopia and from the Scottish government. Also, they just got the funding together through donations and through, again, a grant funding for building a new sanctuary. So that is now fully funded and its construction has started. And the construction is by a company called Greenleaf Design and Build, started and run by the grandson, that's right, of the founders. And it's a very well-run company, do excellent work and really quite good designs that it has got gradually become this sort of, as it were, a footprint of what we do from a built point of view. The plans of the future is when we buy the land from the land fund, which hopefully will happen within the next year, then the first thing we'll do is build more affordable housing, probably 20 of them. And that will be built by a combination of Ecopia, the Park Eco-Village Trust, and the BENCOM, and of course the construction company. The next sector is called social ecology. So as well as the eco-village having a very strong environmental ecology and a very strong environmental ethic, which we call cooperation with nature, a social ecology is how do we manage ourselves? How do we communicate ideas and strategies with one another? And how do we make decisions? So that is done by a number of organizations, the main one being the association of the community called the New Findhorn Association, or NFA. Really, we're all members of that. There are frequent meetings at this present because there's a lot to be decided. So every few weeks, there will be somebody presenting some new ideas, and there'll be some things coming up for decision making, which is largely done on a democratic basis. And that is often through the constitution of the benefit societies. Moving on, education and research. Gaia Education, which was mentioned in the earlier presentations, is actually based in Findhorn. It works in many countries throughout the world, and last year delivered 22,000 courses, a planetary. Just won a €950 grant to do work on soils in Europe, and as well as running programs, both a little bit at Findhorn, hopefully more at Findhorn, but basically in all sorts of countries around the world: Africa, South America, the Far East, Australia, etc. The research arm is an organization called FIRE, Findhorn Innovation Research and Education. They also have a grant from the European Commission. It's an energy grant on something called Interped, being a positive energy district, which is the PED. Findhorn is that, and we're working with 4 other pilots in Europe and another 10 partners in developing this energy district idea throughout the European Commission. We're one field of a number of fields the European Commission is doing in this direction. There are trading companies, and actually the 2 main trading companies are Biomatrix Water and Alternative Energy Systems. AES is a solar company, and they build solar thermal panels, and they also trade in solar PVs. Biomatrix Water does a bioremediation of polluted bodies of water, dirty canals, lakes, harbors, the sea, all sorts of places, working internationally from Seattle right the way through to the Yarra River in Melbourne, Australia, and work throughout Europe, in Amsterdam, France, Denmark, etc., etc. A successful company, AES, a successful company, and able to support the community with the way that they do. For example, Biomatrix Water runs at the sewage treatment plant, which is a nature-based solution, and that's their sort of gift to the community, as it were. There are a number of charities in the community that are working outside of Findhorn itself. One is called Growing Together, that works with distressed youth in the Highlands. They're working in 14 schools with both everything from nurseries to the teenagers. There's another company called Ecologia Youth Trust that does quite a lot of work in Africa supporting youth projects. And Park Eco-Village Trust is also a charity, so it comes within that framework. And lastly, there's energy and site services. We've got quite a sophisticated energy system, with 3 wind turbines, generating most of our renewable energy, and a whole lot of solar PVs and solar thermal. So we generate about 50% of the energy we use. We actually generate 100%, but with the timing of when we generate it, when the wind blows, when the sun is out, we're only able to use 50%. And one of the objects of the Interbed grant that FAR has is to increase that from 50% to 70 to 80%, which of course will have a much better financial footprint and will also make us more locally supportive of the energy. There's also various site services that are run by a site services company called New Findhorn Directions, and the Title Holders Association actually collects the money from us all in order to pay for the work that is done by the New Findhorn Directions. So the next slide, and how long do I have?
How long are you going to take?
I'm not going to take it long. I'm just showing you the complexity. There's a lot of different organizations. There isn't really any overall governing, and to some extent, although some people have tried, we're all a bit shy of doing that. We don't want to get into a part where we depend on the Findhorn Foundation to make all the big decisions, and we just sort of carry them out, which has happened over the last 50 years. We like to be independent, and a lot of the people in these various fields are very good at what they do and are totally capable of getting the finance to do it, getting the people to do it, and getting it done. So you can see in this chart, there's quite a lot going on, and they're siloed in these 7 areas. And that, of course, what makes us an eco-village, an ecological village.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you,
Questions?
Michael. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, myself. I will stop sharing. And also, thank you, Roger. I think I can't really read the chats, but it looks like you've responded to a few. If you or Anton or Graham, if you see anything in the chat that you think should be brought to the group, please do. And how many are we? We're good, about 20 people here. So I'm looking for either hands if you want to do a reaction. I can't see everyone, so that's probably the best way to do it. If you have a thought or question, and it's fine to ask basic questions and it's fine to ask very detailed questions. And I'm curious where you're all at. I realized, like, when Findhorn folded, the foundation folded, it sent shockwaves around the world. I have a little Google alert that anytime Findhorn Foundation shows up in the news, I get an email, and in the weeks following, there were probably 100 news reports in almost every country. And so Findhorn really has had an incredible ripple effect around the world. And I'd say there are millions of people that know about it and have been influenced in some way. So the foundation shifting has been sent major ripples around. But as I think we've all shared, I think within the community, it's actually kind of rolling with it and seeing where to go next. Coming from Findhorn herself, Cornelia, would you like to share?
Yeah. Hi, folks. A few folks on my little WhatsApp chat group around this conference said, "Why were you not presenting there?" And I jokingly said that I'm not a part of the right demographic. The demographic you see represented with the 5 guys, all doctorates, is not really true. There are some women in the community, and actually in the community there are more women than men. But the age demographic is not that far off. It's a bit off, but not that far off, which is one of the challenges we have here at Findhorn, is that being such a strong old community, we are also, having a relatively old population, and how to empower young and younger people to come into this very complex community is one of our challenges, and that's one of the future opportunities and focal points we need in order to create greater sustainability. But what I really wanted to do, why I raised my hand, is that for me, the big question really is, how can we create again a sense of cohesion with the history we have, with the beautiful complexity that Michael demonstrated so well. One of my inspirations to take part in this ICSA conference is really to share with other communities, because it seems to me like communities worldwide are going through many different crises, in many ways probably a microcosm for the macrocosm out there. And on a sort of woo-woo level, I think that we are laboratories to look at solutions, and hopefully we will create some patterns of solutions, of collaborative working that will be relevant for humanity as we together move through these very, very turbulent times. And I'm just hoping that these 3 days in the online virtual community of this conference will also help us here in Findhorn to tackle the challenges that we have. We are a community in crisis, there's no question, and a community in crisis with phenomenal opportunity. And again, Michael's always sort of this positive visionary that gets work done, gets grants made, gets legal structures set up. And I'm sort of more on the softer community side. I've worked a long time with health and community. That was my main focus for 30 years, but also with social sustainability, with affordable housing. And so how can we create the glue that makes it all worthwhile? And also my hunch is that is where where the solutions for the future for the globe lie. And it's hard. I was just coming out of the previous session of the kibbutz members speaking about the much more visceral and devastating crisis they're going through. But still it is, how do we create meaningful community in the diverse and complex ecosystem, and stop othering, stop theming and using, and getting on with this new culture that the planet desperately needs. Yeah. So I'm hoping that after these 3 days, we will, hi Gail, there in the background. Hopefully out of this conference, we will come out with a bit more support for each other. Lovely to see you, Gail. That's me. Thank you, guys.
In Tamil Nadu,
Yes.
in Oroville. It's a 4-day festival.
Oh, good.
Thanksgiving.
Share?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice to see you, Cornelia.
I think part of the glue, strong glue, is working together and working hard together, Cornelia. I think once we get these projects, which are in gestation at this point in time, I think it'll be more like the 70s, where it's hand to the wheel, and that is what builds community: designing together, planning together, working together, building together.
And I would add, in addition to the metaphor of the pioneer species, I've been playing with the metaphor that for most of its evolution, the foundation was sort of like this big fertilized cell. It was like the end all be all. You came there and you were part of the foundation if you stayed there for any significant amount of time. And then the community really grew up. And then the foundation sort of like separated itself over the last few years through redundancies and other things. And it almost felt like there was this big mitosis of the community. Oh, the foundation is somehow separate from everything else. And then it got smaller and it became just one among many businesses. And now it's actually sort of gone, at least for the time being. But the idea is almost like with a cell, there's a division, and then there's more division and more division. And it's possible. I mean, you look at the diagram that Michael showed, and it's almost like there's this complexity, this differentiation that is continuing to happen. And maybe there doesn't need to be a coherence other than people following what they feel the angel of Findhorn is calling them to do and what the world is calling them to do. And if everyone in every organization is doing that, maybe they'll become more and more differentiated. We'll get a blastocyst. And it's only around then when you can kind of tell what this being is going to be, right? If you look at a fertilized cell, you don't know if it's going to be a chicken or an elephant. And it's only when you get to the embryo stage that you start getting a semblance like, oh, I see. And so I love that image because it gives me a lot of faith and trust to say, like, maybe we can't know what the foundation and what the community will be in 5 or 10 years. And maybe that's okay, as long as we sort of all stay to the course that we see in front of us and see what happens.
Of course, we'll be prodded along by climate change.
Absolutely.
And the relocalization of our entire economy and ecology as a community and as a bioregion by climate change. That's one of the main drivers, I think, is going to be building the glue that Cornelia is looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again, Cornelia.
Can I just add to
Roger.
that?
Oh, well, actually, is it okay? I see
Graham.
Roger's hand was up and then Graham.
Graham,
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Graham.
I just want to add that, I prefer to call it an ecological crisis, not a climate crisis, because I think it's actually more a crisis of things like overconsumption and resource depletion and basically and let's admit it, overpopulation. That what's happening there is that the Earth's resources are being depleted at the great expense of nature and natural species, and unless we address consumption, as important as carbon issues are, I think it's really the issue of consumption that's the most important, personally speaking. And that's where I think communities, particularly cohesive communities and particularly egalitarian communities, can come to the fore in addressing the consumption issues of their members and inspiring others to address those issues.
to him. Roger, go ahead. I'm going to try to unpin us. Actually, I didn't realize that we were pinned on this time.
Well, we have a little WhatsApp thing going on here in parallel, which Cornelia basically instigated. And one of the remarks that came up in that context was how the scenario which you laid out for the foundation over the coming months is news to us. We have yet to have heard that degree of intentionality or detail. So I just wonder.
I had to prod Terry to get it.
Sorry?
I had to prod Terry to get the most recent presentation.
Well, I'm glad you did. And now that you have, would you mind just repeating it for the benefit of all of us?
If
So
I
we
can from memory, I mean, the first, yeah, go ahead.
That's it. To repeat what the plan is, and then I'm going to ask Michael to do the same thing regarding this current project that he's working on.
So a 32-week, 5-stage process, if I recall from memory, the first one back in October rather, was to form the team, 10.5 full-time equivalents. And then they were looking at the audience, which I imagine was doing a lot of interviews with stakeholders and Findhorn fellows and others. And then looking at the why, I think kind of sinking back into what are the primary purposes of the Impulse of Findhorn. And then looking at the what, like thinking about what kind of operational models will best manifest and continue that vision. And then, and that's sort of what they're just about to move into. They're just completing phase 3. Phase 4, again, is the operating model, the what, and then probably spend a few months really kind of operationalizing that into the how. And the hope is to come up with a plan by June of 24 with a plan. And my understanding is that each stage, the idea was that they would give 3 options to the trustees to decide on. I don't know what those are or how that's gone. But that's my understanding of where the foundation is at presently.
That sounds very much like a resurrection scenario, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the foundation actually still owns a lot of assets. I mean, and if they sell a lot of their property, they'll have more.
Yes, that's true.
So the reason why they decided to fold was because they wanted to be able to have resources to really be in control of their destiny in a way. If they kept going the way they were going, it would have been sort of taken out from under them. This way they have some choice in the matter.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing more of that unfold in due course. Michael.
So very quickly, it's not going to work for the long-term health of the community to have engineers as old as I am. So the whole point of this engineering grant from the European Commission was that nobody working on the grant it should be over 40. Apart from myself, who are sort of waving my cigar from the sidelines as much as possible. So everyone is under 40, and most are actually, half are under 30. And the idea is to bring up a new generation of people in the social sciences and the engineering sciences who can carry through this work, not only with Findhorn itself, but within GEN and also within our partners in the university academic world, and also we're building new partners in Europe as we do these grants. That's the intention.
Michael, I love the way you dream big.
Wonderful, Michael.
So I'm looking for particularly people who haven't spoken, particularly women if they're out there. And I'm also curious if there are people who had experiences at Findhorn and how it impacted them or what they saw in their surroundings. Iris, please.
Yeah, hi there from the Austrian Alps. Yeah, so interesting to hear all this. It's a long time that I've been in Findhorn several times. As Graham mentioned, first time in 2005. And I researched about Findhorn and so on. I have put something in the chat already, critical turning points from Findhorn. And wow, it's very exciting to hear the transitions and changes right now. And I wonder, well, yeah, maybe my main topic or my research finding now in these issues that you are dealing with right now is that communal non-profit property is actually a basis very important to save community. To prevent community from getting individually whatever. And I know that you started, I don't know, in the 2000s years somehow to sell out quite something with the Field of Dreams. And then now the how's it called, Hinterland. Yeah, so I wonder, what do you think about this, and how your sense of protecting community with non-profit land property is there any, I mean, what is your opinion on that?
That's the whole object of what we call the BENCOM, which is the Eco-Village Findhorn Community Benefit Society. Now, there are 300 members of that society, and it's completely democratic. We just in November had a voting of a new board of directors, which is 6 people, and the constitution means there's a lot of democratic levels we work on, to the inspiration at the beginning, right through when we're having to make the decisions, which involve capital and buying land and all that type of stuff. So I think there's a whole move now to have these community benefit ideas. Ecologia is the same. I would love to see our energy also in cooperative ownership rather than individual companies. They're quite benign. But having said that, it's better having it owned, as it were. That's why I called it social ecology. And the pioneers of social ecology really looked to the cooperative movement and the joint ownership by large groups of people of the resources that do work within the community itself. And as they work, generate energy, generate food, generate all the things that a community needs.
Thanks. I just want to note that, Iris, was there more you wanted to share?
Yes, just the question about the land ownership. I mean, democratic, that's fine, but if there is no communal land ownership, like in a cooperative, for instance, we had in Siebenlinden Eco-Village, we have all owned by the cooperative. So that really prevents.
It's my objective. That's why we put a lot of energy into getting a benefit society. We had to have something that was legally capable of doing that. And if we go through with the land fund and are able to buy 2 or hopefully 3 blocks of land, that will be enough for us to have the bulk of the land either privately owned, and the private people are part of the various communal efforts, as it were, like the title holders or whatever it is. But also, the more we can move towards common ownership, the happier certainly I will be, and a lot of people behind the BENCOM will be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to note, I think it was Chris who said it's nuts that they're not working with the community on the process. And I guess Roger, as an example, not knowing the stages is an example of that. But to give them the benefit of the doubt, I do believe that they're ramping up a consultative process. And so I wouldn't be surprised if someone actually asked you, Roger, to give your thoughts on it. And I do think they're going to be reaching out to the community more, but there's an element of that. And I also want to say, I mean, we're here in Oroville, where, I mean, it makes that non-consultative tendency pale in comparison. Oroville is kind of melting down. It's incredibly polarized, and it's sort of this slow motion takeover of the government with just a select few and the majority of the residents really in opposition to it. And so it's just very interesting that this is happening all over the world, where sort of a small few are sort of maybe trying to control or run the show for many. And maybe it's a microcosm of the macrocosm of where we are in this moment in planetary history. Cornelia.
Well, just to say that the foundation actually is embarking on a quite wide consultative process. And Vic, who is also on the conference, and myself were one of 18 or so people were trained by the team to roll out a why consultation very widely. And I personally and Vic will hold 3 in-person events here in the community, but there will also be online events held, and also questionnaires and stuff. So there will be a lot of opportunity to put your voice in, which I think is one of the most important aspects of that cohesion building, but also of building the better picture for the future.
Thank you, Cornelia. Great. The floor is open. If anyone has thoughts, comments. Yes, that is Chris. You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Being on the NFA Council here, I didn't know anything about that, Cornelia. We put out a vision thing. I had no idea of that, and I had no idea of what Daniel was saying either. And we have a community meeting tonight, and we're talking about, we asked for visions from across the community.
You can say you heard it first in Oroville.
Yeah, I just find the process here most baffling, I have to say.
Thanks, Chris. I hope you bring that into the meeting. We still have a little bit of time.
Well, if we do have time, I wouldn't mind just asking Cornelia for her understanding of how the consultative process sits alongside the buyout process that Michael describes. I mean, are we talking about Findhorn Foundation resurrecting as a department of the larger community, or are we talking about a bona fide resurrection process whereby the foundation essentially reinvents itself and reasserts itself? Do you know?
My understanding is, and I'm only being trained together with Vic and, as I say, 18 others, to run a search and consultative process. And I genuinely believe that what Daniel says is that they do not know what the beastie will be. Will it be a chicken or an elephant, or will it be a dead birth? They don't know, and they're just looking. And yes, they're probably holding it closer to their chest than I am happy with, because I also think it would be easier on them if they would share it more widely, and data processing and all that kind of stuff. Those of us who have done research know that if you ask too many people too many questions, you end up with a lot of data, and what on earth are you going to do with it? They're trying, and the mindset of holding it close and being separate is still very strong. And I think that mindset is a problem. And I have voiced that many times. Yeah. But the questions will be there, the opportunities will be there, a willingness to listen, I think, is there. And a not knowing is also very strong.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cornelia. Iris, and then I wanted to comment on what Cornelia said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe a bit of meta reflection. I just wonder if, like Findhorn, this old, large, long-standing community, and maybe others, and what I observe right now in terms of new community foundations here in Middle Europe. So I wonder if there is, concerning the societal changes we have right now, the developments with, I don't know, the IT and all these things going on, and COVID, of course. So maybe these large homogeneous communities, they have to change now in terms of cultural change as well, I wonder. And because I don't observe many other communities founding right now, like these large scale communities.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I wonder, what do you think in Findhorn? I hear a bit that you feel the need that you need to become more diverse and more smaller sub-organizations, that this is actually a good way to go. So this is what I heard from Michael, is that right?
Yes, that is definitely what I said. It wasn't so much we chose to go that way, that this is what is. What is, we have over the 60 years, if we're starting now, we might not have ended up with this sort of organization structure. But over the years, when we needed somebody to be able to give us loans, invest. Then we formed Ecologia. When we needed someone to own land with funding from the Scottish government, we founded the Benefit Society. You know, when we needed to do some construction, then, you know, Jason Caddy formed the construction company. So it's rather grown like Topsy, as we say. And there's a special sort of need for all these things. And there might be some mergers. People would like to see us merging, and that might very well happen. But at this stage, I think we're representing these 7 areas. And actually, I think it's doing pretty well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I wanted to say that even the fact that we can say that the foundation has ceased functioning, but the community is doing fine, is an amazing thing to say. Because most communities, most eco-villages, is if the central structure fell apart, the whole thing would fall apart, right? And so the fact that there is a relatively mature social ecosystem there, I think is to me sort of the magic of Findhorn. And I remember 30 years ago when I was living there, that was around the time when a lot of members had sort of moved out of the foundation into the surrounding area and were looking at like, hey, how do we still stay in relationship here? And that was a real challenge for a few years. Robert Gilman and other people were really facilitating that process, and they kind of figured it out. And since then, the boundaries became sort of porous. And so maybe I'm on a soapbox here.
You
but
know, over
yes.
the years, most of us have worked for the foundation,
Right.
in one way or another. I worked for the foundation for 20 years,
Right.
A long time ago, and not relevant to today. But we've all had that experience of working within the foundation.
Right.
Let's take the best of that and let's apply it to the community.
And I
And
think
if the foundation reemerges, great.
yeah.
Let's welcome that. But if they don't, it doesn't really matter.
Yes. And just to complete that thought, I mean, there's nothing really at Findhorn that on its own you can't find being done as well or better elsewhere. I mean, in terms of energy, building, even organizational systems, it's not cutting edge in any one thing. Where it's cutting edge is how do we pull all the pieces together and create culture, create stories of who are we in relationship to each other and the planet. That's what we need, I believe, as a species. And so if the foundation doesn't wake up to that, if they say, well, we're just going to create a workshop center, I mean, God bless them. Hopefully they'll find some way forward. But I think they're missing the boat in terms of the real magic and the real opportunity of what Findhorn as a community has to offer. All right. And I see Chris and Helen.
Well said.
Or maybe
Daniel.
who's the other one? I don't know. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Daniel, can you make me host again, please? I've given it up by accident.
I don't know if I can. Anton, are you still around?
I'm here, but I need to be made host again.
Oh, can I do that? Did I get, okay, I will work on that.
Thanks.
Chris, are you able, or whoever there would like to speak?
Hi, it's Viv. Hi, Daniel. Hi, everybody. There's a lot I could say here, but I want to just keep this really brief. My priority is not the legal vehicle. My priority is the underlying impulse. So when I view it that way, there is no othering. It's not the foundation or them or them or them. The legal vehicle is just a mechanism by which we achieve what it is we want to do. The underlying impulse does not lie solely with the foundation. It does not lie solely with the NFA. It does not lie solely with any particular legal vehicle. The underlying impulse lies with us. Which legal vehicle we then choose to enact, how we land that impulse, then matters. But all this kind of them, us, blah, 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 and it's the foundation. Do you know, with the deepest respect to the foundation, it's not about that legal vehicle. It's about the impulse that led that legal vehicle to arise. That's what we need to focus on and then do the work. That's my view.
Thank you. Can you hear your name?
Excellent. It's Vivian.
Oh, that's Vivian. Thank you, Vivian. And also just to Anton, I think Umsel, I don't know how to say the name, is the host. I can't do anything. And let's hear from Helen.
Yeah, it's a question and a sort of observation, I suppose, because I mean, I have very little of the expertise others have of Findhorn, but I have visited in the past and visited other intentional communities that are large, and I'm very interested in this common crisis, that there might be this sort of collapse of what is the sort of social ecosystem, the social infrastructure, the glue that people have talked about. I was particularly traumatized by the notion of the arson attacks because of the loss of the commons, the physical, practical commons where people could gather together, eat together, because that to me has always been the sort of the reproduction of that community that's thriving. So I'm interested in this paradox that you say that the community is in good health, even though the centre has collapsed. And I agree with what Vivian just said. You know, the impulse of a community isn't really determined by the socio-legal model or the entities. Although I do think that access to common land, i.e. not private ownership, not enclosures, is very important to this. Yeah, so I suppose my question is, you know, how in this paradoxical, fragile state, the centre has collapsed, but the community is still going on and you have this consultation. What's happened with the absence of these gathering spaces and the transformative social practices of people coming together and reproducing their sense of belonging and coming together? Because for me, that is very much a kind of material thing. It's about in person. It can't possibly only be a thing on paper in terms of how the organization is structured. So I guess I'm a social geographer, so I'm very interested in the space and place of this.
I'd just like to say that there are small groups that meet once a week regularly, usually Friday evenings. The Barrels meet, Solshay meets, the East Winds meets. These are individual areas within the community that have a barbecue or a meeting or an attunement. And so there are these small groups. Of course, we long to build the new community center, and there's still some insurance money there to get us started. We've tried to buy the land where the old community center was through the land fund, which was very supportive of that, but the foundation is not prepared to go there yet. And they still don't feel that they feel they should be part of the discussion of what the new community center is. And that's rather holding it up right now.
And I'm glad, Cornelia, you have something to add to this. And I think I'll give you the last word too. So because we're just about at time.
Okay, Helen, people do meet, you know, and the blessing of COVID with the Zoom, you know, the community actually is getting a sense of a global community around Findhorn. But the local, you know, you can just walk down the runway and you can take 20 minutes before you get to the shop, because you still meet people all over the place. And the other thing is that our little coffee shop in the Universal Hall, you know, they are now having weekly open mics that are packed. They have folk sessions where people go there to eat. And the NFA that Chris and Viv are both councillors of, we have monthly NFA meetings that are now blended, so that there are 50, 60 people in the hall and there are 50, 60 people on Zoom. And we're keeping away, we are keeping doing it. But yes, the convenience of the community center, of walking in and having a meal together, that convenience is gone. But the social activity continues in many, many other forms.
And can I just add that the cultural activity also continues, you know, the singing and the dancing, which hasn't had much of a mention, and I think is really important. That brings a huge amount of social cohesion and cultural identity as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I imagine Findhorn has touched all of our lives in some ways, for many of us very profoundly, and I think that will only continue. I don't imagine Findhorn, it will not go away. So if you came to this session thinking, oh no, Findhorn's gone, it is not gone. And it is actually surviving and thriving in its own way. And it is both a local community and it is a very powerful global community. And I still think it has a North Star quality to it that we desperately need in these times. So thank you. Thank you particularly for those of you who are currently involved in Findhorn. Bless you. May your efforts manifest exactly as the angel wishes. And thank you, Roger and Graham and Michael, for sharing, and Cornelia as well, and everyone else. So thank you all. Have a good rest of your day, whether it's long or short, wherever you are in the world. And I think I'm going to go get some rest. Be well. Take care.